12-year-old Isla Grant's voice echoed through the bustling train station. Her warm guitar case opened for donations as hundreds of commuters rushed past without a glance. Her mother, Sarah, worked double shifts just to keep their tiny apartment, and every coin Isla earned singing helped put food on their table. But on this cold October morning, something extraordinary was about to happen. A man in an expensive suit would stop, pull out his own guitar, and join her song, creating a moment that would change both their lives forever. The performance would go viral within hours, but the real story was what happened next when this mysterious stranger revealed who he really was and why this little girl's voice had moved him to tears. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning mist still clung to the glass ceiling of Central Station as commuters flooded through the main concourse like water through a dam. Coffee cups steamed in gloved hands, briefcases swung rhythmically with hurried steps, and the constant hum of conversation mixed with the distant rumble of arriving trains. In the midst of this urban symphony stood 12-year-old Isla Grant, her small figure barely visible among the sea of adults rushing to catch their morning trains. Isla's voice rose above the chaos, clear and pure as mountain water. She stood beside one of the massive stone pillars that supported the station's vaulted ceiling, her worn acoustic guitar resting against her hip as she sang an old folk song her grandmother had taught her years ago. The melody was simple but haunting, speaking of hope and dreams that seemed as distant as stars to a girl whose shoes had holes and whose breakfast had been a piece of stale bread. Her guitar case lay open at her feet, lined with faded blue velvet that had seen better days. A few coins glinted in the morning light, scattered like silver tears across the fabric. Most people walked by without even glancing in her direction, their faces buried in phones or fixed on some distant destination that held more importance than a child's song. Isla had been coming to this spot for 3 months now, ever since her mother Sarah had taken on a second job cleaning offices downtown. The early morning shift meant Sarah had to leave their cramped studio apartment by 5 in the morning, and rather than leave Isla alone, she would drop her daughter at the station on her way to work. What had started as necessity had become routine, and what had started as routine had become a small source of income that helped keep their lights on. The girl's fingers moved across the guitar strings with surprising skill for someone so young. She had taught herself to play using an old instrument she had found at a garage sale, its neck slightly warped and its finish worn smooth by countless hands. Sarah had scraped together $15 to buy it, seeing how her daughter's eyes had lit up when she first held it. That was 2 years ago, back when they still lived in the small town of Millfield, before Sarah's ex-husband had disappeared with their savings and left them scrambling to survive. The city had seemed like a place of opportunity when they first arrived, but reality had proven harsher than dreams. Sarah worked as a night janitor at a corporate building and spent her days cleaning houses for wealthy families in the suburbs. The work was exhausting, but it paid better than anything she could find in Millfield, and she was determined to give Isla a better life than the one she had grown up with. As Isla sang, her breath formed small clouds in the cool October air. Her jacket was too thin for the weather, but it was the warmest thing she owned. The station's heating system worked sporadically at best, and the constant opening and closing of the main doors let in gusts of autumn wind that cut through her clothes like knives. Still, she sang, because singing was the one thing that made her feel warm from the inside out. The song she chose that morning was one her grandmother had hummed while baking bread in her small kitchen back in Millfield. It spoke of angels watching over lonely children and dreams that refused to die, even in the darkest hours. Isla didn't fully understand all the words, but she felt their meaning in her bones, in the way the melody seemed to wrap around her heart like a gentle embrace. A businessman in a charcoal suit glanced at her as he passed, his expression softening slightly when he heard her voice. For a moment, it seemed like he might stop, might reach into his pocket and add to the meager collection in her guitar case. But then, his phone buzzed, and his attention shifted to the screen, and he was gone, swallowed by the crowd like he had never been there at all. This was the pattern of Isla's mornings. Brief moments of connection that dissolved as quickly as they formed, leaving her alone with her music and her hope that today might be different. She had learned not to take it personally when people ignored her. Everyone had their own struggles, their own destinations, their own reasons for hurrying past a singing child as if she were invisible. But Isla kept singing because music was the one constant in her life that couldn't be taken away. When the electricity got shut off in their apartment, she could still play her guitar by candlelight. When there wasn't enough food for dinner, she could fill the emptiness in her stomach with melodies. When her mother cried herself to sleep thinking Isla couldn't hear, the girl would hum softly until the tears stopped. The morning crowd began to thin as the rush hour peaked, and then gradually subsided. Office workers had reached their destinations, students had caught their trains to school, and the station settled into its mid-morning rhythm. This was usually when Isla packed up her guitar and walked to the nearby library, where she would spend her day reading and doing homework until it was time to meet her mother for the journey home. But today felt different somehow. The air itself seemed charged with possibility, like the moment before a thunderstorm when every nerve ending tingles with anticipation. Isla couldn't explain the feeling, but it made her want to keep singing, to pour every ounce of her heart into the melody that flowed from her lips. She had just begun a new song. What about a girl who could fly away from all her troubles on wings made of starlight when she noticed him? A man in an expensive suit was standing about 20 feet away, partially hidden behind another pillar. Unlike the other commuters, he wasn't checking his phone or tapping his foot impatiently. He was listening, really listening, in a way that made Isla's heart skip a beat. Ethan Rhys had been about to walk past the singing child just like everyone else. He had an important board meeting at 9:30, a conference call with investors at 11, and a lunch appointment that could determine the future of his company's expansion into international markets. His mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating profit margins and analyzing market trends, when something stopped him dead in his tracks. It was her voice, clear and sweet and somehow familiar, like an echo from a dream he couldn't quite remember. But it wasn't just the quality of her singing that caught his attention, it was the emotion behind it. This wasn't a child playing at being a musician. This was someone who understood that music could be a lifeline, a bridge between despair and hope. Ethan found himself stepping behind the pillar, not wanting to make the girl self-conscious, but unable to walk away. He watched as she sang with her eyes closed, lost in the melody like it was the most important thing in the world. Her guitar was old and battered, her clothes were worn, and her guitar case held maybe $3 in change, but she performed with the dignity and passion of someone gracing the stage at Carnegie Hall. The song she was singing reminded him of something, though he couldn't place one at first. Then, it hit him like a physical blow to the chest. It was the same melody his daughter Emma used to hum while coloring at the kitchen table, back when she was 7 years old and the world was full of possibilities. Emma, who would have been 15 now, if cancer hadn't stolen her away 3 years ago. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the guitar pick he wore on a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his expensive tie. It had been Emma's, a small plastic disc, decorated with glittery stars that she had insisted on using even though her tiny fingers could barely manage it. He had given up music the day she died, convinced that melodies without her laughter to accompany them were nothing but hollow sounds. But standing there in the train station, listening to this unknown girl sing with such pure emotion, something inside him began to crack. Not break, but crack like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. The music wasn't hollow at all. It was alive, breathing, reaching across the space between strangers, and reminding him of who he used to be, before grief had turned his heart to stone. The girl opened her eyes as she finished the song, and for a moment, their gazes met across the crowded station. Ethan saw something in her expression that made his breath catch, a mixture of hope and vulnerability that reminded him so strongly of Emma that he had to lean against the pillar for support. Without thinking, without consulting the rational part of his brain that governed every other decision in his life, Ethan found himself walking toward her. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out something he hadn't touched in 3 years, something he carried with him every day like a talisman but had never had the courage to use. It was a guitar, compact and travel-sized, but perfectly crafted. He had bought it for Emma shortly before she got sick, planning to teach her properly, instead of letting her struggle with the full-sized instrument that was too big for her small hands. The guitar had never been played, had sat in his office like a monument to dreams that would never be fulfilled. Isla watched in amazement as the well-dressed man approached her with a guitar in his hands. She had seen plenty of musicians in the station before, street performers like herself, trying to make a few dollars from the generosity of strangers. But this man was different. His suit probably cost more than her mother made in a month. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned the world. "Would you mind if I joined you?" Ethan asked, his voice rougher than he had intended. It had been so long since he had spoken about music with anyone that the words felt strange in his mouth. Isla nodded, too surprised to speak. She watched as he tuned the small guitar with practiced fingers, his movements sure and confident despite the slight tremor she noticed in his hands. When he looked up at her, she saw something in his eyes that she recognized, a kind of sadness that ran deeper than words could express. "What would you like to sing?" he asked softly. "Do you know Sanctuary?" Isla asked, naming a song that had always been one of her favorites, a gentle ballad about finding peace in the midst of chaos. Ethan's smile was sad but genuine. "I wrote that psalm," he said quietly. "A long time ago, for someone very special." Isla's eyes widened. She had no idea who this man was, but she had been singing his psalm for months, finding comfort in its message of hope and redemption. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had been earning money singing the work of someone who clearly didn't need the coins in her guitar case. "I used to be a musician," Ethan continued, his fingers finding the opening chords of the song. "Before I became something else entirely." The first notes rang out clear and true, blending with the ambient sounds of the station like they belonged there. Ethan's playing was masterful, each chord precisely placed and perfectly timed. But it was when Isla began to sing that something magical happened. Her voice soared above his guitar work, the two instruments, human voice and steel strings, weaving together in perfect harmony. Other sounds in the station seemed to fade away as their music filled the space, creating an invisible bubble of beauty in the midst of urban chaos. Commuters began to slow their pace, then stop entirely, drawn by the unexpected concert taking place beside the stone pillar. Ethan played like a man remembering how to breathe after holding his breath for years. Each note was a small resurrection, bringing back pieces of himself he had thought were lost forever. He watched Isla as she sang, seeing in her face the same joy that Emma used to show when music filled their house. But this wasn't Emma, and he wasn't the broken father sitting beside his daughter's hospital bed. This was something new, something healing, something that felt like the first sunrise after an endless night. The song built to its crescendo, Isla's voice climbing to heights that seemed impossible for someone so young. People had gathered in a loose circle around them now, phones appearing as the crowd realized they were witnessing something special. But neither Isla nor Ethan noticed the audience. They were lost in the music, connected by something deeper than melody, something that spoke to the parts of themselves they had learned to keep hidden from the world. When the last note faded away, the silence that followed was profound. For a moment, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. Then the applause began, scattered at first, but growing stronger as more people joined in. Someone whistled, a child clapped excitedly, and several people stepped forward to drop bills and coins into Isla's guitar case. But Ethan barely noticed the crowd. He was looking at Isla, seeing the tears in her eyes, and recognizing them as the same kind he had been holding back for 3 years. Happy tears, sad tears, tears that came from touching something beautiful and true, in a world that often seemed determined to crush such moments. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the applause. "I had forgotten what that felt like." Isla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing a streak of dirt across her cheek. "Thank you for playing with me," she said. "I've never sounded that good before." Ethan smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. "You sound that good every time," he said. "I could hear it from across the station, that's why I stopped." The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their routines, but carrying with them the memory of what they had just witnessed. Several more donations found their way into Isla's guitar case, including a $20 bill from a woman who whispered "beautiful" before hurrying away to catch her train. Ethan looked down at the money scattered across the blue velvet, more than Isla usually made in a week of singing. But he was thinking about something else entirely, something that had been growing in his mind from the moment he heard her voice. "Can I ask you something?" he said, settling the small guitar across his lap. "Why do you sing here?" Isla glanced around the station, as if making sure no one else was listening. "My mom works really hard," she said quietly. "2 jobs, and we still don't have enough sometimes. I thought maybe if I could help a little bit." She trailed off, embarrassed by the admission. Most adults didn't want to hear about a child's financial worries, and she had learned to keep such things to herself. But something about this man made her feel safe, like she could tell him the truth without being judged. Ethan felt his heart clench. Here was a 12-year-old girl trying to support her family the only way she knew how, using a gift that should have been nurtured in music schools and concert halls, instead of being displayed in train stations for galas. Spare change. The injustice of it made him angry, but it also made him determined. "What's your name?" he asked. "Isla," she said. "Isla Grant. I'm Ethan," he replied, not mentioning his last name or the company that had made him wealthy beyond most people's dreams. "Isla, I want you to know that what you're doing here, trying to help your family, it's one of the most courageous things I've ever seen." Isla blushed, unused to such praise. "It's not courage," she said. "It's just what you do for people you love." The simplicity of her statement hit Ethan like a thunderbolt. It's just what you do for people you love. When had he forgotten that fundamental truth? When had his life become so focused on profit margins and market share that he had lost sight of what really mattered? He thought about Emma, about all the songs they would never sing together, all the concerts they would never attend, all the moments of musical joy that had been stolen by illness and death. But here was another child, alive and talented and in need of help, and maybe, just maybe, he could do something that would make a difference. "Isla," he said carefully, "how would you feel about taking some proper music lessons?" Her eyes widened. "We can't afford music lessons," she said quickly. "I mean, I'd love to, but my mom is already working so hard, and I wouldn't want to ask her to spend money on something like that when we need it for other things." "What if I told you that there are scholarships available for talented young musicians?" Ethan said, his mind already working out the details. "What if I told you that there are people who would love to help someone with your gift develop their abilities?" Isla stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Really? There are scholarships for kids like me?" "There are," Ethan said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. By the time he got back to his office, there would be. "But I would need to meet with your mother first, to discuss the details." The girl's face fell slightly. "She's at work," she said. "She doesn't get home until really late, and she's always so tired. I don't think she has time to meet with scholarship people." Ethan felt another piece of his heart crack open. This child was so used to disappointment, so accustomed to opportunities slipping away because of circumstances beyond her control, that she couldn't quite allow herself to hope, even when hope was standing right in front of her. "What if I came to meet her at her convenience?" he asked. "Evening, weekend, whenever works best for your family." "This is important, Isla. Your music is important." For a moment, the girl just stared at him, as if trying to determine whether he was real or just another adult making promises he wouldn't keep. Then, slowly, she nodded. "She gets home around 10:30 at night," Isla said. "But she's really tired then, and she has to get up early for her other job. Maybe on Sunday? That's her only day off." "Sunday would be perfect," Ethan said, pulling out his phone to make a note. "Can you give me your address?" Isla hesitated. Their apartment building wasn't in the best neighborhood, and she was suddenly self-conscious about the idea of this well-dressed man seeing where they lived. But the hope in her heart was stronger than her embarrassment. She recited the address, and Ethan typed it into his phone without any change in expression. He had grown up in a neighborhood that wasn't much better. Back before his music had opened doors, he never could have imagined. He understood what it meant to be ashamed of where you came from, And he also understood that circumstances of birth had nothing to do with the worth of a person. I'll be there Sunday afternoon, he promised. Around 2 o'clock, if that works for your mother. Isla nodded eagerly. I'll tell her tonight. She's going to be so surprised. Ethan smiled, imagining the conversation between mother and daughter. He hoped Sarah Grant would be open to his proposal, because he was already planning something that would change both their lives dramatically. The sound of his phone buzzing brought him back to the present moment. He glanced at the screen and saw 3 missed calls from his assistant and a text message reminding him of his 9:30 board meeting. He was already 15 minutes late, something that would have been unthinkable just an hour ago. I have to go, he said, standing and carefully placing the small guitar back in his briefcase. But I'll see you Sunday, okay? Okay? Isla said, still hardly believing that any of this was real. And thank you for playing with me. It was the best morning I've had in a long time. Ethan looked down at her, this small girl with her worn clothes and her beautiful voice and her heart big enough to try to save her family one song at a time. It was the best morning I've had in 3 years, he said quietly. As he walked away, weaving through the late morning crowd toward the exit, Ethan could hear Isla beginning another song. Her voice followed him out of the station and into the busy street, where his driver was waiting with the engine running and an apologetic expression on his face. I'm sorry, Mr. Rhys, the driver said as Ethan slid into the back seat of the black sedan. I tried calling, but it's fine, Marcus, Ethan said, his mind still back in the station with a 12-year-old girl who had reminded him of what music could be. Sometimes the most important meetings are the ones we never plan to attend. The board meeting was a disaster, at least by Ethan's usual standards. He was distracted, his attention wandering whenever someone mentioned quarterly projections or market penetration strategies. All he could think about was Isla's voice, the way she had closed her eyes while singing, the trust she had shown in letting a stranger join her performance. During the lunch meeting with potential investors, he found himself humming under his breath, a habit he had abandoned years ago. His business partner, David Chen, noticed immediately. Are you feeling all right, Ethan? David asked during a break in the presentation. You seem different today. I met someone this morning, Ethan said, then immediately regretted the words. How could he explain that a chance encounter with a street musician had turned his world upside down? A woman? David asked with interest. Since Emma's death, Ethan had thrown himself into work with single-minded determination, ignoring his friends' attempts to get him back into the social scene. A musician, Ethan corrected. A very talented 12-year-old musician. David's eyebrows rose. And this is significant because? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, watching the late afternoon sunlight stream through the restaurant's windows. Because I had forgotten that music exists for more than just making money, he said finally. I had forgotten that it can be about hope and connection and making the world a little more beautiful. That evening, instead of staying late at the office as he usually did, Ethan went home to his penthouse apartment, overlooking the city. The space was modern and expensive and perfectly decorated, but it had never felt like home. Not since Emma died, and not since he had packed away everything that reminded him of the life he used to live, before grief had hollowed him out. He made himself dinner, something he rarely did anymore, and ate it while looking out at the lights of the city spread below him. Somewhere out there, Isla Grant was probably doing homework at a kitchen table in a cramped apartment, her mother exhausted from another day of working multiple jobs to make ends meet. The contrast wasn't lost on him. After dinner, he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He went into his study and opened the closet where he had stored all of Emma's things. Her clothes, her toys, her books, and in the very back, the full-sized guitar he had bought for himself when she first showed interest in music. The instrument was dusty but still perfectly tuned, as if it had been waiting patiently for his return. He carried it to the living room and sat in the chair by the window, the same chair where he used to hold Emma while she fell asleep to his soft singing. His fingers found the chords to Sanctuary, a song he had written years ago during a period when his own life had felt chaotic and uncertain. He had been a struggling musician then, playing in small clubs and coffee shops, dreaming of recording contracts and sold-out concerts. The song had been about finding peace in the midst of uncertainty, about believing that somewhere in the world there was a place where broken hearts could heal. He had eventually achieved everything he had dreamed of as a young musician. Record deals, Grammy nominations, sold-out tours that took him around the world. But success had come with a price, and by the time Emma was born, he was already beginning to think more like a businessman than an artist. When she died, he had abandoned music entirely, convinced that melodies without her laughter were meaningless. But today, sitting in his empty apartment with his guitar in his hands and the memory of Isla's voice in his ears, he began to understand that he had been wrong. Music wasn't meaningless without Emma. It was a way of keeping her memory alive, a bridge between the past and the present, a language that spoke to parts of the human heart that ordinary words could never reach. He played until well past midnight, working through songs he hadn't touched in years, feeling muscles in his fingers wake up from their long sleep. By the time he finally went to bed, he had made several decisions that would have shocked his business partners and probably worried his accountant. The first was that he was going to help Isla Grant in every way possible, not just with music lessons but with whatever her family needed to build a stable life. The second was that he was going to get back into music himself, not as a career, but as a calling, a way of honoring his daughter's memory while also honoring the gift that had been given to him. The third decision was the most important one, though he wasn't quite ready to admit it to himself yet. He was going to try to feel alive again, to open his heart to the possibility that joy and sorrow could coexist, that loving Emma's memory didn't require him to shut out everything else that could be beautiful in the world. Friday morning found him back in the same spot in the train station, arriving early with the travel guitar in his briefcase and a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. But when he reached the stone pillar where Isla usually performed, she wasn't there. He waited for an hour, checking his watch and scanning the crowd for any sign of the girl with the clear voice and the warm guitar. Other commuters came and went. The morning rush reached its peak and began to subside, but Isla never appeared. Concern began to gnaw at him. Had something happened to her? Had her mother gotten sick? Or lost one of her jobs? Had Isla decided that singing in the station wasn't worth the effort? The possibilities cycled through his mind, each one more troubling than the last. He was about to give up and head to his office when he spotted a familiar figure near the information booth. Isla was there, but she wasn't singing. She was sitting on a bench with her guitar case closed beside her, staring at her hands with an expression of deep dejection. Ethan approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Isla? Is everything okay?" She looked up, and he saw that her eyes were red from crying. "Oh, hi," she said, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I didn't think you'd come back." "Of course I came back," he said, sitting down beside her on the bench. "I told you I'd see you Sunday, but I wanted to hear you sing again. Are you feeling all right?" Isla shook her head. "My mom lost her cleaning job yesterday," she said quietly. "The lady she worked for said some money was missing from her purse, and she blamed my mom. Mom didn't take anything, I know she didn't, but the lady wouldn't listen." Ethan felt a surge of anger on behalf of this woman he had never met. "I'm sorry," he said. "That must be very difficult for both of you." "Mom was crying when she got home last night," Isla continued. "She tries to hide it from me, but I can always tell. She said we might have to move again, find someplace cheaper to live, maybe go back to Millfield where her sister lives." The thought of Isla leaving the city, of her voice disappearing from the train station and from his life, hit Ethan harder than he had expected. "What did you tell her about our conversation yesterday?" he asked. "I started to," Isla said, "but then she got the phone call about losing her job, and she was so upset. I didn't want to get her hopes up about something that might not be real." Ethan understood. In a life marked by disappointment and broken promises, it was easier to protect yourself by expecting the worst rather than daring to hope for the best. But he also knew that this was exactly why his intervention was so important. "Isla," he said gently, "I want you to call your mother right now and ask her if she can meet me for coffee this afternoon. Tell her it's about your music, and tell her it's important. She's at her other job, Isla said. She can't really talk during work hours. Then tell her to call me back when she has a break, Ethan said, handing her his business card. My direct number is on there. Tell her that someone wants to discuss a scholarship opportunity for you, and that time is of the essence. Isla took the card and stared at it, her eyes widening as she read the embossed text. Ethan Rhys, she said slowly. Rhys Entertainment Group. She looked up at him with an expression of shock. You're that Ethan Rhys? The one who used to be a famous musician? Ethan nodded. I was, yes. A long time ago. My mom has some of your old albums, Isla said, her voice barely above a whisper. She used to play them when I was little. She said your music helped her get through some really hard times after my dad left. The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was a woman who had found comfort in his songs during her darkest moments, and now her daughter had unknowingly led him back to music during his own period of darkness. The connections that life wove between strangers were more intricate and meaningful than any human could fully comprehend. Then she'll understand why I want to help, Ethan said. Call her Isla. Trust me. With trembling fingers, Isla dialed her mother's work number. The conversation was brief and conducted in whispers, but when she hung up, her face was transformed by the first genuine smile Ethan had seen from her. She's going to call you on her lunch break, Isla said. She could barely believe it when I told her who you were. She kept asking if I was sure, if you were really the same person whose music she grew up listening to. I'm the same person, Ethan said, though even as he spoke the words, he wasn't entirely sure they were true. The man who had written those psalms years ago had been hopeful, passionate, willing to believe that music could change the world. The man he had become was cynical, closed off, focused on building financial empires instead of emotional connections. But maybe, just maybe, he could be both. Maybe the businessman and the musician didn't have to be mutually exclusive. Maybe success and authenticity could coexist if he was willing to redefine what success actually meant. Why don't you sing while we wait for her to call? Ethan suggested, pulling the travel guitar from his briefcase. I have a feeling this is going to be a very good day. Isla's smile grew brighter as she opened her guitar case and lifted out her worn instrument. The morning crowd was lighter than usual, but the people who were there seemed more inclined to stop and listen. Perhaps it was the sight of the well-dressed man playing alongside the young street musician, or perhaps it was simply that their music together created something that neither could achieve alone. They performed 3 songs together, each one better than the last as they found their rhythm and learned to anticipate each other's musical choices. By the time Ethan's phone rang with Isla Grant's call, Isla's guitar case contained more money than she usually made in a week, and both musicians were glowing with the joy that comes from creating something beautiful. The conversation with Sarah was emotional from the very first moment. She had recognized Ethan's voice immediately, having listened to his songs countless times during the years when Isla was small and money was tight and hope was the only thing that kept her going. To learn that this man, whose music had been a source of strength during her darkest hours, wanted to help her daughter was almost too wonderful to believe. They arranged to meet that evening at a small cafe near Sarah's apartment building. Ethan spent the rest of the day making phone calls and setting wheels in motion, preparing to offer the Grant family something that would change their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. When Isla Grant walked into the cafe that evening, Ethan recognized her immediately. She had Isla's delicate bone structure and the same intelligent eyes, though hers were marked by the kind of exhaustion that comes from working multiple jobs and worrying constantly about making ends meet. She was younger than he had expected, probably not yet 35. But she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had faced hardship and emerged stronger. Mr. Rhys, she said, extending her hand with a shy smile. I can't believe I'm actually meeting you. Your music got me through some very difficult times. Please, call me Ethan, he said, standing to pull out her chair. And I have to tell you, your daughter is extraordinarily talented. She has a gift that deserves to be nurtured and developed. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She loves music more than anything, she said. Sometimes I feel terrible that I can't give her lessons, or buy her a better guitar, or any of the things that would help her grow as a musician. but we barely manage to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. That's exactly why I wanted to meet with you, Ethan said gently. I'd like to offer Isla a full scholarship to the Berkshire Academy of Music. It's a boarding school in Massachusetts, one of the finest music education institutions in the country. Sarah stared at him in shock. A boarding school? But that would mean… It would mean she would live there during the school year, Ethan confirmed. I know that's a big decision, and I know it would be hard to be separated from her. But Sarah, she would receive world-class training in music theory, composition, and performance. She would work with teachers who have trained some of the most successful musicians in the world. We could never afford something like that, Sarah said, shaking her head. Schools like that cost more than I make in a year. The scholarship would cover everything, Ethan explained. Tuition, room and board, instruments, sheet music, even transportation home for holidays. There would be no cost to you at all. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what was being offered. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us. Ethan had been expecting this question, but he still struggled with how to answer it honestly. I had a daughter, he said quietly. She would have been about Isla's age now. She loved music the way Isla does, with her whole heart and soul. She died 3 years ago, and I thought my connection to music died with her. But when I heard Isla singing yesterday morning, something inside me remembered what music is really for. It's not just entertainment, or even art. It's a way of connecting souls across time and space. Sarah's expression softened with understanding and sympathy. I'm so sorry for your loss, she said quietly. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. Thank you, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma, my daughter, she would have wanted me to help someone like Isla. She would have been excited about the possibility of another young musician getting the chance to develop her gifts. Sarah wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. This is all so overwhelming, she said. Yesterday I was worried about how we were going to pay rent next month, and now you're offering my daughter an opportunity I never could have dreamed of. There's more, Ethan said gently. I'd also like to offer you a position with my company. We need someone to oversee our charitable foundation, particularly the programs that support young artists. It would be a full-time position with benefits, and it would pay well enough for you to quit your other jobs and focus on just one career. Sarah's mouth fell open. You're offering me a job? But I don't have any experience with foundations or charitable work. I'm just a cleaning lady. You're a mother who has sacrificed everything for her child's well-being, Ethan corrected. You understand what it means to struggle, what it means to hope against hope, what it means to keep going even when the odds are stacked against you. Those are exactly the qualities we need in someone who will be helping other families in similar situations. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Ethan explaining the details of both offers and Sarah asking questions that showed both her intelligence and her deep love for her daughter. By the end of the evening, they had reached an agreement. Isla would start at the Berkshire Academy after the winter break, giving her a few months to prepare for the transition. Sarah would begin her new job the following Monday, starting with a trial period to see if the work was a good fit for both of them. As they walked out of the cafe together, Sarah turned to Ethan with tears in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she said. This is going to change everything for us. Don't thank me yet, Ethan said with a smile. Wait until you see how hard I'm going to work both of you. Isla is going to be challenged in ways she's never been challenged before, and you're going to be learning an entirely new field. But I have a feeling you're both up to the task. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of preparation and change. Isla continued singing in the train station, but now she was also taking private lessons with a teacher Ethan had arranged, learning to read music properly and developing her technique. Her improvement was remarkable, her natural talent blossoming under professional guidance. Sarah proved to be a natural at her new job, bringing a combination of empathy and practical wisdom that made her invaluable in working with families who were struggling financially. She had lived through the experiences that many of the foundation's beneficiaries were facing, and her ability to connect with them on a personal level was extraordinary. Ethan found himself becoming increasingly involved in the foundation's work, spending less time on the purely business aspects of his company and more time on projects that had meaning beyond profit margins. He also began playing music again, not professionally, but personally, rediscovering the joy that had first drawn him to songwriting years ago. The relationship between Ethan and the Grant family deepened over those months. He became something like an uncle to Isla, encouraging her musical development while also making sure she stayed grounded and focused on her education. With Sarah, he developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to helping others. On the day Isla was scheduled to leave for the Berkshire Academy, Ethan arrived at the train station early to find her performing one last time at her usual spot. The difference between this performance and her first was striking. Her voice was stronger, more controlled, her guitar playing more sophisticated. But the essential quality that had first caught his attention, the emotional honesty that made her music so compelling, remained unchanged. A substantial crowd had gathered to listen, including several regular commuters who had grown fond of her morning concerts over the past months. Someone had even set up a small camera to record her performance, and Ethan wasn't surprised to see the video wall trending on social media within hours. "Ready for your new adventure?" he asked when she finished her final song. Isla nodded, though he could see the nervousness in her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I don't belong there?" "You belong wherever your talent and hard work take you," Ethan said firmly. "And you have more talent in your little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. But more importantly, you have something that can't be taught. You have a heart that understands what music is really for." Sarah appeared with Isla's suitcases, and the three of them made their way to the platform where Isla's train was waiting. The goodbye was emotional, but not tragic. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The start of a journey that would take Isla places she had never imagined possible. As the train pulled away from the station, Ethan and Sarah stood on the platform waving until it disappeared from sight. Then they walked back through the main concourse, past the stone pillar where everything had begun, and out into the bright morning sunshine. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we keep doing the work," Ethan said. "We find other young people who need help, other families who are struggling, other dreams that deserve a chance to become reality." "And Isla?" "Isla is going to become exactly who she was always meant to be," Ethan said with certainty. "She's going to make music that touches people's hearts, that reminds them of their own dreams, that helps them believe in the possibility of beauty even in the darkest times." 3 years later, Ethan sat in the audience at Carnegie Hall, watching as 18-year-old Isla Grant took the stage for her debut solo performance. She had grown into a confident young woman, her talent honed by years of rigorous training, but her essential sweetness unchanged. When she began to sing, her voice filled the magnificent hall with the same pure emotion that had first caught his attention in a busy train station. The song she had chosen to open her concert was "Sanctuary," the piece Ethan had written years ago, and that had brought them together. But her interpretation was entirely her own, infused with her unique perspective and the wisdom that came from understanding both struggle and triumph. As her voice soared through the hall, Ethan felt Emma's presence in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Not as a source cough of grief or loss, but as a warm reminder that love transcends death, that the connections we make with others ripple outward in ways we can never fully comprehend. Sarah sat beside him in the audience, elegant in a dress that reflected her new status as the successful director of one of the country's most effective charitable foundations. She had remarried the previous year, a kind man who understood and supported her dedication to helping others. But her proudest achievement was clearly the daughter on stage, whose voice was now reaching thousands of people instead of just the handful of commuters who had been lucky enough to hear her sing in a train station. After the concert, the three of them gathered backstage, surrounded by flowers and congratulations from other performers and music industry professionals. Isla had received offers from several recording labels, but she was taking her time, choosing carefully based on which company would best support her artistic vision, rather than simply offering the most money. "I have something for you," Isla said to Ethan, pulling a small wrapped package from her dressing room table. It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Ethan unwrapped the gift to find a guitar pick, similar to the one he wore around his neck that had belonged to Emma. But this one was engraved with a simple message: "For the man who taught me that music is a bridge between hearts." "I had it made from a piece of my old guitar," Isla explained. "The one I was playing when we first met. I thought you might like to have a piece of where our story began." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes as he held the small token. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." As they stood together in the backstage area, surrounded by the controlled chaos that follows any major performance, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. It had started with a chance encounter, a moment of connection between strangers that had grown into something none of them could have predicted. Isla had found her voice and her place in the world, but more importantly, she had learned that talent without compassion is meaningless, that success without giving back is hollow. Sarah had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, becoming a leader in her field and a voice for families who needed advocates. And Ethan had remembered that the most important things in life couldn't be measured in dollars or market share, but in the connections between human beings and the beauty they could create together. The story that had begun with a little girl singing in a train station had become something larger than any of them had imagined. Through Isla's music, and Sarah's work, and Ethan's resources, they had touched hundreds of other lives, creating ripples of hope and opportunity that would continue long after they were gone. But perhaps the most important transformation had been Ethan's own journey back to life. Back to the understanding that love doesn't end with death, but continues in new forms, new relationships, new ways of honoring those we've lost, by helping those who still need our care. As they prepared to leave the concert hall, Isla turned to Ethan with a smile that reminded him so much of Emma that his heart ached with both sorrow and joy. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything. Thank you," he replied, meaning it more than any words he had ever spoken. "For reminding me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply stop and listen." Outside the concert hall, the city streets were alive with the energy of a Friday night. People hurried past, focused on their own destinations and dreams, just as they had that morning years ago when a 12-year-old girl had stood beside a stone pillar and sung her heart out to anyone who would listen. Somewhere in the city, Ethan knew, there were other young people with gifts that deserved to be nurtured, other families struggling to make ends meet, other dreams waiting for someone to believe in them. The work would continue, the connections would multiply, and the music would go on, because that's what music does. It builds bridges between hearts, creates hope where none existed before, and reminds us that even in the darkest times, there is always the possibility of something beautiful just around the corner. All we have to do is be brave enough to stop, to listen, and to believe that one voice, one song, one moment of human connection can change everything. The little girl who had once been ignored by hundreds of rushing commuters had become a voice that could fill concert halls and touch hearts around the world. But more importantly, she had become a reminder that talent can bloom anywhere, that dreams can come true with hard work and the right support, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. In the end, that's what the story had always been about. Not just the music, though the music was beautiful. Not just the success, though the success was well-deserved. It was about the moment when one person chose to stop and really listen to another, when barriers of age and class and circumstance fell away in the face of shared humanity, when the possibility of connection proved stronger than the forces that usually keep us apart. And in a world that often seems designed to make us feel isolated and alone, that might be the most important lesson of all. That we are never truly alone as long as we remain open to the possibility of connection. As long as we remember that everyone we meet is fighting their own battles and dreaming their own dreams, and as long as we believe that music, in all its forms, has the power to heal, to inspire, and to remind us of who we really are beneath all the roles we play and masks we wear. The train station where it all began still echoes with the sounds of hurrying feet and rushing commuters. But now, when Ethan passes through on his way to work, He always pauses beside the stone pillar where Isla used to sing. Sometimes, he can almost hear her voice carried on the wind, a ghost of melody that reminds him of the morning when everything changed. And sometimes, if he's very lucky, he encounters another young performer, another dreamer with a guitar and a voice and a heart full of hope. When that happens, he always stops to listen, because he knows now that the most important meetings are often the ones we never planned to have, and the most beautiful music is usually found in the most unexpected places.